Sit down, little girl. This isn't a classroom for children.
Professor Nathaniel Kessler didn't even turn around when he said it. He kept his eyes on the equation sprawled across the whiteboard, chalk still moving, voice flat with the particular boredom of a man who had said cruel things so many times they no longer felt cruel to him. Amara Bennett did not sit down. She stood in the third row of a packed MIT lecture hall, backpack straps digging into her shoulders. 140 pounds of doctoral candidates and postdocs turning in their seats to stare at the 10-year-old who had just spoken out loud in the middle of Professor Kessler's Unbeaten Bet. Someone near the front laughed, a short, surprised bark, quickly swallowed. Her cousin Marcus, a third-year PhD student 2 seats down, went pale. He reached for her sleeve. "Amara," he whispered, "sit down, please." She didn't look at him. She was looking at the board. Every autumn, Kessler opened his advanced seminar to the public, a tradition as old as his tenure, and every autumn he closed it the same way. He wrote out a dense, elegant proof in his sharp, confident hand, folded his arms, and said the same 11 words he'd said for 15 years. "I'll bet none of you can find the flaw in this." It was never a trick question with no answer. It was worse than that in a way, a real proof, fully worked, that he insisted was airtight, daring anyone in the room to catch a mistake he swore wasn't there. No one ever had. Kessler wasn't just a professor. He was an institution inside an institution. MIT's most decorated applied mathematician under 60, a man whose name sat on 3 endowed chairs, and whose bet had become department legend, whispered about in dining halls, recorded on phones, occasionally written up in math blogs with headlines like "Nobody beats Kessler." Grown men with doctorates had tried. Grown men with doctorates had failed, publicly, in front of 300 people, and slunk back to their seats while Kessler smiled, the smile of a man who had never once been wrong in that room. Which was exactly why nobody expected the hand that went up in row 3 to belong to a 4th grader in a hand-me-down cardigan. Amara Bennett was homeschooled in a 2-bedroom apartment in Dorchester by a mother who worked double shifts at a hospital laundry and still found 40 minutes every night to sit beside her daughter with a stack of library books on number theory. Neither of them could always afford to renew. Amara had never set foot in a real classroom. She had never taken a standardized test. What she had, since she was 6 years old, was an eye for the one line that didn't belong, the wrong turn hiding inside something that looked correct. She caught mistakes on napkins. She caught them in the margins of her mother's grocery lists. She caught them in Marcus's own graduate homework, problems 3 grade levels above her, just to watch his face when she pointed at a single line and said, "That one's wrong." Tonight, Marcus had brought her along on a whim, a treat, he told their aunt, nothing more, just a chance for her to sit in a real lecture hall and watch real mathematicians work. He never imagined she'd be the one standing. "There's an error," Amara said again, louder this time, steady in a way that 10-year-olds are not supposed to sound. "In your 3rd line, you divided by a term that could be 0. The room went silent in the particular way 300 adults go silent when a child has just said something too specific, too confident, too correct sounding to laugh off completely. Kessler finally turned around. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed the way men dress when they've spent decades being the smartest person in every room they enter. No tie, sleeves rolled with practiced casualness, the kind of relaxed authority that comes from never once being challenged in winning. He looked at Amara the way you look at something that has wandered somewhere it doesn't belong. "Shoot," he said, and a ripple of laughter moved through the front rows. Not everyone, but enough. Enough that Amara felt it land somewhere just under her ribs. "Whose daughter is this?" Marcus's hand tightened around his notebook. He didn't answer. "I appreciate the enthusiasm," Kessler continued, already turning back to the board, already dismissing her, the way he dismissed every challenger before her, except none of the others had been small enough to need a booster seat to see the equation clearly. "But this bet is for people who understand what they're looking at." He picked up his chalk again. Amara did not sit down. You divided by x minus a, she said. But you never proved x can't equal a. If it does, this whole proof falls apart. The chalk stopped moving. For 3 full seconds, Nathaniel Kessler, 15 years undefeated, 3 endowed chairs, a bet that had never once been won, stood at his own whiteboard and said absolutely nothing at all. And in the third row, a 10-year-old girl in a cardigan 2 sizes too big waited to find out whether the door in front of her was about to open, or whether it was about to slam shut on her fingers, live, in front of everyone. Somewhere near the back of the hall, someone had already pulled out their phone. If you were sitting in that room, would you have raised your hand? Before we see what happened next, subscribe to this channel if you love stories where underestimated people prove everyone wrong. Now, let's see what the professor did next. Kessler set his chalk down on the tray with a small, precise click, the kind of sound a man makes when he wants a room to notice his composure. Come up here, then, he said. Since you're so certain. Marcus grabbed her wrist. You don't have to do this. Amara pulled free and stepped into the aisle. 300 people watched a 10-year-old walk to the front of a lecture hall, built for men twice her age and 4 times her height. Someone in the second row lifted a phone and angled it toward the stage. A woman beside him whispered something behind her hand, and the man next to her laughed without bothering to lower his voice. Amara stopped at the base of the whiteboard. It came up past her shoulders. Kessler didn't offer her the step stool folded against the wall behind the podium. He crossed his arms and waited. Show the room, he said. Where exactly does my proof fail? She pointed to the third line, where a fraction sat beneath a term written as x minus a. Right here. You never said x can't equal a. If it does, you're dividing by 0, and everything after this line doesn't mean anything. An interesting objection, Kessler said, in the tone of a man setting up a joke he'd told 100 times. But an objection isn't a proof. Anyone can wave their hand at a denominator. Show me a case, a real number, where this actually breaks. A murmur ran through the front rows. Someone near Marcus exhaled through their nose, not quite a laugh. Kessler picked the chalk back up and held it out to her, handle first, the gesture of a man offering someone enough rope. Take your time, he said. We'll wait. Amara took the chalk. She looked at the equation for a long moment, longer than the room expected. A graduate student 2 rows back leaned toward his friend and murmured something about a booster seat. Kessler didn't laugh, but he let the moment sit, unhurried, the silence doing his work for him. Then, Amara reached up and wrote a single value beneath the third line. X equals 3. A equals 3. She worked the substitution out beside it, small numbers in a careful hand, each step landing under the last. When she reached the denominator, she underlined it twice. 0, she said. Your whole equation collapses right here. Everything you wrote after this line was built on top of a division that doesn't exist. The room did not laugh this time. A man in the third row, older, grey cardigan, a legal pad open on his knee, sat forward and started working the substitution himself, pen moving fast. 2 students near him did the same. The sound of pages turning replaced the sound of whispering. Kessler stepped toward the board and studied the numbers Amara had written, the underline she'd drawn beneath the 0. His jaw moved, once, like he was chewing something he hadn't ordered. A single counterexample, he said. In a specific case, doesn't necessarily invalidate the general. It does when the general case depends on the specific one being impossible, said the man in the grey cardigan, not looking up from his own pad. And you never excluded it, Nathaniel. It's not in your assumptions anywhere. Kessler's eyes moved to him. Dr. Ford, this is hardly the venue. You made it the venue, Dr. Ford said. You do this every year. A ripple of something moved through the hall. Not applause, nothing that clean, but a shift. Chairs creaking as people leaned forward instead of back. Someone near the exit stood up to get a better angle with their phone. Kessler turned back to the board. back to the small, stubborn numbers a child had written under his proof. And for the first time all evening, he didn't have a line ready. "Let's take a short recess," he said, already reaching to erase the board. "Don't," Dr. Ford said, and the word cracked through the hall, harder than anything Kessler had said all night. "Leave it up." Kessler's hand stopped an inch from the chalk. He looked at Amara, really looked at her this time, not the glance he'd given a child who'd wandered somewhere she didn't belong, but the look of a man recalculating something in real time and not liking the number he was getting. "Fine," he said quietly. "Recess." He walked off the stage without erasing anything, and the room did not return to its normal volume. Marcus made his way down the aisle, phone already buzzing in his pocket, 3 texts from people who hadn't even been in the building. Amara stood by the whiteboard a moment longer, chalk still in her hand, looking at the 0 she'd underlined twice. She didn't know yet that Dr. Elaine Ford had seen this exact flaw once before, 8 months earlier, in a private email she'd sent to Nathaniel Kessler that he had never answered. The recess lasted 11 minutes. It felt longer. Amara sat in a hallway chair, while Marcus paced in front of her, phone pressed to his ear, talking fast to their aunt in a voice trying too hard to sound calm. Through the double doors, she could hear the lecture hall filling back up, chairs scraping, voices louder than they'd been before the break. When they walked back in, the crowd had changed. New people stood along the back wall, students who'd heard something was happening and left their dorms to see it. A young man near the door was already narrating quietly into his phone, walking backward to keep the stage in frame. Kessler was waiting at the whiteboard, the earlier proof erased. In its place, a new problem, longer, denser, lines of notation stacked 3 deep. "Since you enjoyed finding flaws," he said, once the room had settled, "let's see if you can find one here, if it exists." Dr. Ford stood from her seat near the panel table. "Nathaniel, what is that?" "A proof I've been developing," Kessler said. "Unpublished. If there's an error, I'd genuinely like to know." "That's not the same exercise," Ford said. "That's not even close to the same weight class." "She said she has an eye for errors," Kessler said, not looking at Ford, looking instead at Amara. "Let's find out how far that eye actually goes." Someone near the front let out a short breath that wasn't quite a laugh, but wanted to be. Amara looked at the board. The notation was unfamiliar in places, symbols she recognized from Marcus's textbooks, but arranged in configurations she hadn't seen. She said, "Or you want me to prove there isn't one?" Kessler's mouth twitched. "I want you to try." Marcus stood at the edge of the aisle, close enough to intervene, far enough to let her decide. He didn't say anything. He'd learned, in the last 11 minutes, that saying anything only made it worse. Amara stepped up to the board. She read the first 6 lines twice. The 7th line held a substitution that looked clean on its surface, elegant even, the kind of step built to be admired rather than checked. She read it a 3rd time. 90 seconds passed. The hall was quiet enough that the click of the wall clock was audible from the back row. "There," she said, and pointed. "This step. You're assuming the sequence converges before you've shown it's bounded." A pause. Somewhere in the 3rd row, a graduate student flipped back through his own notes, checking. "That's not an error," Kessler said. "That's a standard assumption in this class of problem." Then, "Show me a number where it's true," Amara said. "The way you asked me to show one where you were wrong." The room went still in a different way than before, not waiting to see if she'd fail, but waiting to see if he'd answer. Kessler didn't answer right away. He glanced toward the panel table, toward Dr. Ford, who was not writing notes anymore. She was watching him. "This is a research-level distinction," Kessler said finally, choosing his words like a man picking his way across ice. "It would take considerable time to construct a full counterexample live in this format. You gave me 90 seconds for the first one," Amara said. A laugh broke out near the back, real this time, sharp, quickly hushed by the people around it. Kessler's face didn't change much, but something behind it did. He reached for the eraser. "We'll revisit this after further review," he said. "Leave it up," Dr. Ford said again, standing fully now, her chair scraping back loud enough to carry. "I want to see the full board before anyone touches it." She crossed to the whiteboard, close enough to read every line, and stopped at the 7th, the one Amara had pointed to. She read it once. She read it again. Then she turned around, slowly, and looked directly at Kessler, not at Amara, not at the crowd, at him. "Nathaniel," she said, "I sent you an email about this exact assumption in March." The hall didn't make a sound. "You never answered it," Ford said. "I assumed you'd fixed it before publication." "You didn't fix it. You just stopped putting it in front of people who might catch it." Kessler's hand, still holding the eraser, did not move toward the board. Nobody in the hall moved for what felt like a very long 5 seconds. Kessler set the eraser down on the tray, careful, deliberate, buying himself time with the small motion of his hand. "Elaine, that email was a preliminary note. It wasn't a formal review. I don't recall it changing the substance of 'you recall it,'" Ford said. "I have the message. I have your read receipt." A student near the front pulled out a laptop and started typing fast, the way people type when they're trying to get something down before it changes shape. 2 rows back, a woman leaned over to her neighbor and whispered something that made him sit up straighter. Marcus had stopped pacing. He stood at the edge of the aisle with his phone forgotten in his hand, watching a room full of adults realize, in real time, that the story they'd walked into wasn't the one they thought, even if the assumption is worth revisiting. Kessler said, straightening, finding his footing again, "That doesn't mean the child found the flaw independently. She's clearly been coached, or she's seen a version of this material somewhere. I've never seen this proof in my life," Amara said. She said it flatly, without heat, the way she'd said everything else that night. It landed harder than if she'd shouted. Kessler looked at her for the first time without the practiced ease he'd walked in with. Something in his face had gone tight, calculating, a man checking exits. She pointed to a term without knowing the underlying framework. He said, "To the room now, not to her." A guess, an educated guess perhaps, but "She asked you the same question you asked her," Dr. Ford said. "Show a number where it's true. You couldn't. That's not a coaching problem, Nathaniel. That's a proof problem. Your proof problem." A man near the panel table, older, in a university lanyard, someone who'd been introduced earlier as the department chair and had said almost nothing all evening, rose from his seat. "Dr. Ford," he said, "are you saying this flaw was known prior to tonight?" "I'm saying I flagged it in writing 8 months ago," Ford said. "And it was never addressed. And tonight it nearly went unchallenged in front of 300 people, because the only person in this room willing to say it out loud was 10 years old." The department chair turned to Kessler. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The hall had gone quiet enough that his ordinary speaking voice reached every corner of it. "Nathaniel, is that email accurate?" Kessler didn't answer immediately. He looked at the board, at the 7th line, at the small, unglamorous gap in his own work that a 4th grader had found in under 2 minutes. "It's one interpretation of an early draft," he said. "That's not a no," the chair said. Somewhere in the crowd, a phone lit up, a face turned toward the stage, recording, and no one asked them to stop. The young man by the door who'd been narrating into his phone since the recess was still narrating, voice low and urgent, describing the scene to whoever was on the other end in real time. Amara stood by the whiteboard, chalk still resting in the tray beside her hand, watching 3 adults argue about an email she hadn't known existed 20 minutes earlier. She hadn't come here to expose anyone. She'd come because Marcus offered her a free evening out and a chance to see a real lecture hall, and because a man at the front of the room had told a wrong equation to 300 people like it was true. "I'd like the full record of that correspondence, submitted to the department," the chair said. "Tonight, if possible. And Nathaniel, I think it's best if we conclude the evening here." Kessler didn't move for a moment. Then he nodded once, short, and started gathering his notes off the podium, with hands that weren't quite steady. He didn't look at Amara before he left. He didn't look at anyone. The hall didn't clap. It didn't need to. The sound that filled the room instead was quieter and stranger. 300 people talking at once, in low voices, phones out, the particular hum of a story already leaving the building before the people inside it had finished living it. Marcus finally reached Amara's side and crouched down slightly, the way he used to when she was smaller and needed steadying after something loud. "You okay?" he asked. Amara looked at the board one more time, at the 0 she'd underlined twice an hour earlier, still faintly visible under the newer chalk. "I just wanted him to fix it," she said. Behind them, Dr. Elaine Ford was already talking to the department chair in a low, urgent voice, the words review and retraction passing between them more than months. Neither of them noticed yet that the video from the back of the hall had already been uploaded, and that by morning the whole university would know exactly what happened in that room tonight, and exactly whose name was now attached to it. By morning the video had 400,000 views. By noon it had 2 million, and MIT's press office had 3 separate reporters holding on their phone lines, all asking the same question in different words. Was it true that a tenured professor's signature bet had been built, in part, on a flaw he'd known about for months and never disclosed? The department chair did not wait for the reporters to get an answer first. He suspended Kessler's public lecture series before lunch, pending a formal review, and asked Dr. Elaine Ford, "You submit her March correspondence to the Academic Integrity Office by end of day." She already had it printed. 2 former students came forward within 48 hours, describing similar moments from years past, questions raised and quietly buried, objections that never made it past a recess. Neither had ever gone public before. Both said, separately, that they hadn't believed anyone would take them seriously. Kessler released a short statement through the university 2 days later. It admitted the March email. It did not admit much else. He kept his tenure. He lost the lecture series that had carried his name for 15 years. And the department quietly removed his photo from the hallway display where past bet winners had never once been posted, because in 15 years there had never been one. Amara didn't see any of this happen. She heard about it from Marcus, in pieces, over phone calls their aunt mostly didn't allow. A week after the lecture, NIT's outreach office invited her back to campus, not to a lecture hall this time, but to a small conference room with a folding table and a plate of cookies nobody touched. Dr. Ford was there. So was the department chair. They didn't offer her anything official. 10-year-olds don't enroll in doctoral programs. But they offered her something else. A standing invitation to sit in on any open seminar she wanted, for as long as she wanted. No ticket, no back row. A reserved seat near the front with her name tipped to it. Amara asked if that meant she could come back for the bet next year. Dr. Ford told her there wasn't going to be a bet next year. Not like that one. On the walk out, Amara stopped at the same lecture hall doors she'd walked through the week before. Through the small glass panel, she could see the whiteboard, wiped clean now, waiting for whatever would be written on it next. She didn't ask to go back inside. Kessler was not there that day. He was there 2 weeks later, alone, long after the building had emptied for the evening, standing in front of the same whiteboard with no proof written on it at all. A janitor mentioned it later, almost in passing. A man standing in an empty lecture hall, chalk in hand, not writing anything. Nobody ever confirmed what he was thinking. Nobody needed to. Amara went back to her apartment in Dorchester that night, the way she always did. Up 2 flights of stairs, past a mailbox with a dent in the door, into a kitchen where her mother was folding laundry from the shift she'd taken, instead of coming to the lecture. Amara didn't tell her everything right away. She told her the important part first. "I found a mistake," she said, "a big one. And I didn't back down." Her mother stopped folding. "Did they listen?" Eventually, Amara said. That was the whole story, as far as Amara was concerned. Not the video, not the reporters, not the resignation letter Kessler would eventually submit for the lecture series, quietly, without a press release. Just the part where she said something true in a room full of people who expected her to stay quiet, and it turned out to matter. The lesson in it wasn't complicated, and it never needed 300 people or a viral video to be true. Being the smallest person in the room, the youngest, the least credentialed, does not make you wrong. Being certain and loud and tentured does not make you right. The only thing that ever actually settles a question is the question itself, checked, rechecked, and answered, honestly, no matter who's holding the chalk. Amara Bennett didn't win a bet that night. She just refused to let a wrong answer stand because everyone in the room was too polite or too intimidated to say so first. Sometimes that's the only difference that matters. If a story like this stayed with you, if it reminded you that the smallest voice in the room is sometimes the one telling the truth, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want more stories like Amara's, subscribe, because this isn't the last room where nobody expected the right answer to come from the back row.